Hello there, and welcome to Midnight Geography. Tonight we'll drift into a collection of Earth's most soothing geographical truths. Geography is the quiet accumulation of time and chance, where water carves patience into stone and wind writes stories in sand. It's the art of how our planet arranges itself when no one is watching, creating places that exist in perfect indifference to human knowledge of them. If you enjoy these peaceful geographical explorations, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other curious minds find their way here too. But for now, let's begin. The Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia contains 10 billion tons of salt spread across an expanse larger than some countries, creating the flattest place on Earth with elevation variations of less than 1 meter. During the rainy season, a thin sheet of water transforms this salt desert into the world's largest mirror, so perfect that satellites use it to calibrate their instruments. The salt crust, several meters thick in places, forms hexagonal patterns that stretch to the horizon, nature's own geometric art. Beneath this white expanse lies half the world's lithium reserves, dissolved in ancient brine. The Incas believed this place was where the gods mixed heaven and earth, and when you stand here during the wet season, with clouds reflected so perfectly below that direction loses meaning, their belief seems less like mythology and more like observation. Pink flamingos somehow find this desolation each year, their reflections doubled in the shallow water, while islands of giant cacti rise from the salt like forgotten gardens. At night, with no humidity to blur the stars, the Milky Way reflects in the water so clearly that visitors report vertigo, unable to tell if they're looking up or down. Lake Bled in Slovenia has a small island with a church where legend says ringing the bell 3 times grants wishes, and the lake never freezes completely due to warm springs bubbling up from deep below. The island is Slovenia's only natural island, though natural seems inadequate for something so perfectly placed, as if designed by someone who understood exactly what beauty should look like. The church bell, cast in the 16th century, has been rung by so many hopeful hands that the rope is smooth as silk. Pletna boats, their design unchanged for centuries, ferry visitors across water so clear you can see fish swimming 6 meters down. The thermal springs that prevent freezing also create pockets of mist on cold mornings, giving the lake an ethereal quality that photographers chase but never quite capture. The castle perched on the cliff above has watched over this scene for 1,000 years, its reflection creating a symmetry that seems too perfect for accident. Local swans have learned the boat schedules, approaching at precisely the right times for feeding, their internal clocks synchronized with human routine. The Eye of Quebec in Canada is a perfectly circular lake created by a meteorite impact 214 million years ago, now filled with water so pure it's used to calibrate scientific instruments. This cosmic wound has healed into something beautiful, its circular rim rising 200 meters above the water, creating a natural amphitheater of ancient rock. The lake is actually 2 rings of water separated by an island that itself contains a lake, circles within circles like a geological target. The water's purity comes from its isolation and depth, fed only by rain and snow with no rivers flowing in or out. Scientists studying the lake have found that its water layers don't mix, creating distinct zones with different temperatures and chemistry, time capsules of different eras stacked vertically. In winter, the ice forms patterns that mirror the underlying impact structure, as if the meteor's memory persists in frozen water. The Innu people have known this place for thousands of years, calling it the Forbidden Eye, believing it watches the sky that wounded it. From above, it does look like an eye, unblinking and patient, waiting perhaps for another visitor from space. Santorini's cliffs in Greece are actually the inner walls of a volcanic caldera that exploded 3,600 years ago, possibly inspiring the legend of Atlantis. The explosion was so powerful it sent tsunamis to Crete and ash to Egypt, ending civilizations and entering mythology. What remains is a crescent of cliffs, painted white villages perched on the rim of absence, looking inward at what isn't there anymore. The caldera is still active, with new volcanic islands growing in the center where the mountain once stood, black rock emerging from blue water, like the earth rebuilding itself. The layers in the cliff faces tell the story in colors: white ash, black lava, red scoria, each band a different eruption, a geological autobiography written in stone. The sunsets here aren't just beautiful, they're transformed by volcanic particles still in the atmosphere, creating colors that don't exist elsewhere. Houses are carved directly into the volcanic rock, their cave-like interiors maintaining perfect temperatures year-round. The local wine tastes of volcanic soil, minerals giving it flavors that can't be replicated, as if you're drinking the essence of the eruption itself. The Blue Lagoon in Iceland maintains a constant temperature of 37 to 39 degrees Celsius year-round, heated by geothermal energy from 2,000 meters below the surface. This isn't a natural formation, but a beautiful accident, created when a geothermal plant's mineral-rich discharge formed pools that happened to be the perfect temperature for bathing. The water's milky blue color comes from silica particles that reflect light in ways that seem artificial, too pure for nature. The lagoon completely renews itself every 48 hours, fresh heated water constantly flowing through, carrying minerals that have been underground for centuries. People cover themselves in white silica mud, becoming temporary sculptures in the steam. The surrounding lava fields, black and forbidding, make the blue water seem even more surreal, an oasis of warmth in a landscape that otherwise suggests the beginning or end of the world. In winter, bathers float in hot water while snow falls on their faces, the contrast so extreme it confuses the nervous system. The geothermal plant nearby, which created this accident, provides power and heat to thousands of homes, making this beauty a byproduct of practical engineering. Ha Long Bay in Vietnam contains 1,169 limestone islands, most uninhabited and unnamed, creating a seascape that changes with every tide and mist. These karst towers emerged from the sea over 20 million years, carved by water and wind into shapes that defy expectation. Local legend says a dragon descended here, its thrashing tail carving valleys that filled with seawater, and the islands are its scattered jade and jewels. Caves honeycomb through many islands, some large enough to hold entire villages, others accessible only at low tide for minutes at a time. Floating villages exist in the sheltered waters between islands, entire communities living on the water for generations, their children learning to swim before they walk. The mist that rolls through the bay transforms it hourly, islands appearing and disappearing like thoughts, never quite the same view twice. Phosphorescent plankton lights the water at night, making boat wakes glow green, as if the dragon of legend still swims below. Some islands are hollow, containing hidden lakes called rooms that can only be reached by swimming through caves at exactly the right tide, private worlds within worlds. The chocolate hills of Bohol in the Philippines number exactly 1,176 cone-shaped hills that turn brown in dry season, formed from coral deposits when the area was underwater millions of years ago. These nearly perfect domes spread across 50 square kilometers, so uniform in shape that early visitors refused to believe they were natural. During the rainy season, grass covers them in green, but as the dry months arrive, the vegetation dies and turns chocolate brown, giving them their name. No trees grow on these hills, just grass, creating a landscape that looks like a vast box of identical chocolates. Local legend tells of two giants who fought for days, throwing rocks and sand at each other until exhausted, they became friends and left, forgetting to clean up their mess. The limestone of the hills dissolves slightly with each rain, meaning they're slowly disappearing, though at a rate that would take millions of years to notice. Between the hills, rice paddies fill the valleys, the geometry of agriculture contrasting with nature's strange regularity. Tarsiers, tiny primates with enormous eyes, live in the forest fragments between hills, evolutionary refugees from when this landscape was different. Lake Baikal's Olkhon Island in Russia is the largest lake island in the world and contains its own lakes, creating lakes within an island within a lake. This sacred center of shamanism for the Buryat people rises from Baikal's ancient waters like a world within a world. The island stretches 72 kilometers long, but in places narrows to just 500 meters, creating a landscape of forests, steppes, and deserts in miniature. Shaman Rock, at the island's cape, is considered one of Asia's 9 most sacred places, where the spirit of Baikal is said to live. The island's lakes are saltier than Baikal itself, supporting different ecosystems, different fish, as if each body of water insists on its own identity. In winter, Baikal's ice presses against Olkhon's shores, creating pressure ridges of turquoise ice that look like frozen waves. The island has its own climate, receiving less than 200 millimeters of rain annually while surrounded by water, a desert in a lake. Trees here grow horizontally, shaped by winds that never stop, their branches all pointing the same direction, like natural weather vanes frozen in wood. The marble caves of Chile can only be reached by boat or kayak, with smooth blue walls carved by 6,000 years of waves from General Carrera Lake. These caves, technically made of marble formed from limestone metamorphosed over millions of years, create a cathedral of swirling blue patterns that change with the water level and light. The marble peninsula, called the Marble Cathedral, has been sculpted into chambers, tunnels, and pillars that look designed but are entirely natural. The lake's glacial melt gives the water an intense blue-green color that reflects onto the white marble, creating an ethereal blue glow inside the caves. As you paddle through, the sound of water lapping against marble creates an acoustic effect that some describe as the earth humming. The patterns in the marble, formed when the limestone was under immense pressure, deep underground, tell a story of geological forces that predate the lake by millions of years. Early morning is best, when the low sun angle illuminates the caves from within, though each time of day offers different colors, different moods. The marble continues underwater, suggesting these visible caves are just the entrance to something larger, deeper, still being carved. Mount Fuji in Japan is actually 3 separate volcanoes stacked on top of each other, with the current peak formed 10,000 years ago on top of volcanoes that are 100,000 and 700,000 years old. This perfect cone, so symmetrical it seems drawn rather than formed, is actually a complex layer cake of geological history. The mountain creates its own weather, with lenticular clouds forming at the summit even on clear days, crowns of vapor that inspired countless paintings. The climbing season lasts just 2 months when the mountain allows visitors. The rest of the year it returns to solitude, wrapped in snow and wind. 5 lakes surround Fuji, each reflecting the mountain from a different angle. 5 different portraits of the same subject. The forest at its base, Aokigahara, grows on lava that flowed 200 years ago, the tree's roots spreading across rock rather than into it. Despite being Japan's highest peak, Fuji is climbed by 300,000 people annually, following paths worn by millions of feet over centuries. The sunrise from the summit, called Goraiko, arrives first here before anywhere else in Japan, making Fuji literally the land of the rising sun. The Maldives consists of 1,192 coral islands, grouped in 26 atolls, with 80% of the land less than 1 meter above sea level. This nation exists in the margin between ocean and sky, more water than land even within its borders. The islands are actually the tips of a submarine mountain range, the Chagos Laccadive Ridge, most of which remains underwater. Each atoll is a ring of coral around a lagoon, creating natural harbors that seem designed for shelter. The coral that built these islands is alive, growing about 2.5 centimeters per year, racing against rising seas in slow motion. Many islands are so small you can walk across them in minutes. Entire nations you could explore in an afternoon. The sand isn't made of rock, but of parrotfish waste, these colorful fish eating coral and excreting sand, each fish producing 90 kilograms of sand annually. At night, bioluminescent plankton makes waves glow blue, as if the sea itself is electric. The house reefs around each island contain more species than many entire seas, biodiversity compressed into small spaces like nature, concentrating its creativity. Lake Como in Italy reaches depths of 425 meters, making it one of Europe's deepest lakes, surrounded by villas that have stood for 500 years. This Y-shaped lake, carved by glaciers and filled with alpine melt, creates microclimates that allow palm trees and tropical plants to grow at the foot of snow-capped mountains. The lake has never frozen in recorded history, its depth storing summer warmth through winter. Roman writers described the same villas we see today, or at least their ancestors, continuity stretching back 2 millennia. The lake is so deep that if the Eiffel Tower were placed at the bottom, its tip wouldn't break the surface. Wind patterns on the lake are so predictable that sailors have names for each one. Tivano from the north in the morning, Briva from the south in the afternoon, each wind arriving on schedule. The mountains rise directly from the water, in places leaving no shore at all, just water meeting vertical rock. Gardens cascade down hillsides and terraces, each level a different climate zone, allowing gardeners to grow everything from alpine flowers to lemons on the same slope. The Faroe Islands experience 260 rainy days per year, creating waterfalls that flow upward when strong winds blow rain back toward the sky. This archipelago in the North Atlantic exists in permanent conversation with water, whether falling, flowing, or flying. The islands are actually the tops of a submarine mountain range, peaks that barely break the surface. Sheep outnumber humans 3-to-1, and they've grazed here so long that the landscape is shaped by their appetites, creating the island's characteristic green velvet appearance. The Gulf Stream keeps temperatures mild despite the latitude, but wind is constant, sometimes reaching speeds that require people to crawl rather than walk. Villages nestle in the few sheltered spots, houses painted in bright colors as if defying the gray skies. The islands have more helicopters per capita than anywhere else, as they're often the only way to travel when storms make boats and roads impossible. Optical illusions are common here, islands that appear to float above the horizon, rainbows that form complete circles, and the northern lights reflecting off wet grass creating ground-level auroras. Jeju Island in South Korea formed from a volcano that erupted 2 million years ago, creating 360 smaller volcanic cones across the island. This island of black rock and wind has more nicknames than any place its size. Island of the Gods, Honeymoon Island, Hawaii of Korea. The volcanic soil, called Bat Dam, is so porous that rain immediately soaks through, creating an island surrounded by water yet historically short of it. Grandfather stones, called Dol Harubang, carved from volcanic rock, stand guard around the island, their faces worn smooth by centuries of wind. The women divers, Henyo, hold their breath for minutes diving for seafood, a tradition passed from mother to daughter for centuries, though now the youngest is in her 50s. Caves formed by lava tubes snake under the island, some containing lakes, others forests of stone formations that look organic but are purely mineral. Wild horses run across the volcanic grasslands, descendants of Mongolian horses brought 7 centuries ago. The island's isolation created unique everything: dialect, culture, even genetics, with DNA studies showing Jeju people are measurably distinct from mainland Koreans. The Norwegian fjords contain coral reefs in complete darkness, discovered only in 2000, thriving in cold water 39 to 2,000 meters deep. These cold water corals, primarily Lophelia pertusa, don't need sunlight or symbiotic algae, feeding instead on plankton carried by deep currents. Some reefs are 8,500 years old, having grown continuously since the last ice age. Silent cities in the darkness. The reefs can be several kilometers long and 30 meters high, larger than many tropical reefs but invisible from the surface. They grow just 6 millimeters per year, patience made physical. The fjord's depth and cold water create perfect conditions: stable temperatures, strong currents bringing food, and protection from storms. Fish congregate here in numbers that rival tropical reefs, but in complete darkness, navigating by lateral lines and bioluminescence. ROV cameras reveal colors that no eye has evolved to see, reds and oranges that exist without purpose in the permanent night. Some fjords contain multiple reef levels at different depths, like apartment buildings for deep-sea life, each floor with different residents adapted to different pressures. Lake Hillier in Australia stays pink year-round due to Dunaliella salina algae, and the color remains even when water is removed and bottled. This bubblegum pink lake on Middle Island defies expectation so thoroughly that early pilots thought their eyes were malfunctioning. The lake is separated from the Southern Ocean by just a narrow strip of white sand and vegetation, creating a color palette that seems edited: pink lake, white sand, green forest, blue ocean. Scientists initially couldn't explain why this lake stayed pink while others changed color with seasons, but discovered the algae here produce particularly stable carotenoids. The salt concentration is so high that swimming feels more like floating in thick air, your body unable to sink. No fish live here, but the lake teems with microscopic life adapted to conditions that would kill most organisms. Aboriginal stories speak of the lake as sacred women's business, its pink color connected to fertility and life-giving forces. Commercial salt harvesting ended a century ago, leaving the lake to its strange beauty. Flying over, the lake looks like a piece of rose quartz set in green velvet, too perfect to be natural. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland consists of 40,000 interlocking basalt columns formed by volcanic activity 60 million years ago. These hexagonal pillars fit together like a giant's puzzle, so perfectly geometric they inspired the legend of a causeway built to Scotland. The columns formed when lava cooled slowly and contracted, creating fractures that propagated downward in nearly perfect hexagons, nature choosing the most efficient shape. Some columns rise 12 meters high, others barely break the surface, creating a stepped landscape that does indeed look like a road for giants. The same geological formation continues underwater and emerges again at Fingal's Cave in Scotland, supporting the legend of a trans-sea causeway. Each column is a separate piece, not connected to its neighbors except by proximity. making the formation simultaneously solid and fragile. The rocks ring like bells when struck, each column a different note, allowing musicians to play the causeway like a stone xylophone. Waves have carved and polished the formation for millions of years, creating pools, channels, and amphitheaters that change with every tide. Bora Bora's Mount Otomanu in French Polynesia is the remnant of an extinct volcano that has been sinking for 3 million years. This jagged peak, rising 727 meters from a lagoon so blue it seems digitally enhanced, is all that remains of a massive shield volcano. The island is sinking about 1 centimeter per century, slowly returning to the sea that birthed it. The barrier reef surrounding the island is actually growing on the volcano's former slopes, coral building upward as the land subsides. The lagoon between reef and shore contains water so clear that sharks and rays appear to fly rather than swim. The volcanic soil is so fertile that breadfruit and coconut trees grow without cultivation, and traditional navigators can smell the island's flowers 50 kilometers out to sea. The mountain is unclimbable, its volcanic rock too fractured and unstable, making the summit one of the few places on this tourist island that remains unvisited. As the island sinks, the reef grows, maintaining the lagoon in a balance between destruction and creation that has lasted millennia. The Plitvice Lakes in Croatia are 16 terraced lakes connected by waterfalls, with water so clear you can see fallen trees from decades ago preserved in the depths. These lakes exist because of a delicate partnership between water, plants, and minerals. Moss and algae extract calcium carbonate from the water, slowly building natural dams of travertine that create the terraces. The process continues today, with barriers growing about 1 centimeter per year, constantly reshaping the landscape. Each lake is a different shade of blue or green, the color determined by minerals, algae, and the angle of sunlight, a natural color chart that changes hourly. The wooden walkways that wind through the park float just above the water, allowing visitors to walk across lakes that look solid from above, but reveal their depths up close. Fish swim beneath your feet, so clearly visible they seem suspended in air rather than water. In winter, the waterfalls freeze into curtains of ice, but water continues flowing behind them, creating a landscape that moves even while frozen. The fallen trees visible in the depths are becoming stone, slowly petrifying in the mineral-rich water, wood transforming to rock over centuries. Easter Island is moving eastward at 7.5 centimeters per year, riding on the Nazca tectonic plate toward South America. This isolated speck in the Pacific, further from other land than almost anywhere on Earth, is slowly closing the gap, though it will take 50 million years to reach Chile. The island is the summit of a massive volcanic mountain that rises 3,000 meters from the ocean floor. The Moai statues, nearly 1,000 of them, were carved from compressed volcanic ash at a single quarry, some still attached to the rock, frozen in the act of birth. Recent experiments showed the statues could walk, using ropes and rhythmic rocking, explaining oral histories that said the Moai walked to their platforms. The island was once forested with millions of giant palms, but the last tree was cut around 1650, transforming paradise into the barren landscape we see today. The Rapa Nui people developed their own script, Rongorongo, one of the few independent writing systems in human history, though no one alive can read it. Despite its desolation, the island's volcanic soil is so rich that crops grow faster here than almost anywhere else in Polynesia. Lake Titicaca between Peru and Bolivia sits at 3,812 meters elevation, making it the highest navigable lake in the world where large boats can travel. At this altitude, The air contains 40% less oxygen than at sea level, making even simple tasks exhausting for visitors. The lake is so large it creates its own weather system, moderating temperatures that would otherwise be unbearable at this height. According to Inca mythology, this is where the world began, where the god Viracocha emerged from the waters to create the sun, moon, and stars. Beneath the surface lie ruins of temples and settlements, discovered only recently, suggesting the lake level has risen and fallen dramatically over millennia. The Uros people live on floating islands made entirely of totora reeds, adding new layers as the bottom ones rot, constantly rebuilding their world. These reeds are also used to build their boats, houses, and even eaten as food. The water is so clear in places that you can see ancient offerings thrown by pilgrims, gold and silver glinting in the depths. At night, the thin atmosphere makes stars appear close enough to touch, their light reflecting in water that never warms above 14 degrees Celsius. The Isle of Skye in Scotland has a coastline so complex that no point on the island is more than 8 kilometers from the sea. This creates a landscape where salt air reaches everywhere, shaping everything from the plants that grow to the stories people tell. The coastline, if straightened, would stretch over 600 kilometers, all contained in an island you can drive across in under 2 hours. Sea locks penetrate deep inland, bringing the ocean into the mountains, creating fjord-like landscapes where seals swim beneath peaks. The Quiraing landslip has been moving for thousands of years, the land still settling from ancient volcanic activity, roads requiring constant repair as the ground shifts beneath them. Fairy pools cascade down from the Quillan Mountains, water so clear it seems like liquid glass, too pure to be real. The island's weather can show all 4 seasons in a single hour. Sun giving way to rain, then snow, then sun again, as if unable to decide what mood to maintain. Gaelic is still spoken here, one of the last strongholds of a language that predates English by 1,000 years. The Old Man of Storr, a rocky pinnacle, stands like a sentinel, formed when ancient lava flows cooled and fractured. Cappadocia in Turkey has fairy chimneys formed by volcanic ash that hardened into soft rock, carved by wind and rain over millions of years. These cone-shaped formations, some 40 meters tall, look like a city built by giants and abandoned to time. The rock is soft enough to carve with simple tools, leading humans to hollow out homes, churches, and entire underground cities within them. Some of these underground settlements descend 85 meters deep, with ventilation shafts so efficient they still function after 3,000 years. Early Christians hid here from Roman persecution, painting frescoes in cave churches that remain vivid in the darkness. The landscape changes color with the sun, white at noon, pink at dawn, deep red at sunset, as if the rocks themselves are breathing with the day. Hot air balloons fill the sky each morning, over 100 at a time, drifting silently over a landscape that already seems dreamlike. Pigeon houses are carved into cliff faces, their droppings once so valuable as fertilizer that they formed part of dowries. The valleys have names like Love, Rose, and Imagination, each one a different shade of stone, different shapes carved by erosion. Lake Geneva holds 89 cubic kilometers of water, enough to cover all of Switzerland with 2 meters of water. This crescent-shaped lake, shared between Switzerland and France, is so large it has tides, small but measurable, the moon pulling at alpine water. The lake moderates the climate so effectively that vineyards grow on its shores at latitudes where grapes shouldn't ripen, and palm trees survive winters that freeze other lakes solid. A Seiche effect causes the water to slosh back and forth like a bathtub, the entire lake tilting, sometimes raising water levels by a meter in minutes without any visible cause. The depth reaches 310 meters, deep enough that bodies lost in the lake often never surface, the cold and pressure keeping them suspended in permanent darkness. Medieval villages reflect perfectly in still morning water, their images so clear that photographs look the same upside down. The lake was formed by the Rhone Glacier, which carved this basin then melted to fill it, the glacier's great-great-grandchild still visible in the mountains, shrinking more each year. Steamboats from the Belle Epoque still cruise these waters, paddle wheels churning through the same routes they've followed for 150 years. The Seychelles Vallée de Mai contains coco de mer palms that produce the world's largest seeds, weighing up to 25 kilograms. These seeds, shaped suggestively like the human pelvis, were once worth more than gold, believed to grow on trees beneath the ocean. The palms are either male or female, and local legend says they move together to mate on stormy nights, and anyone who sees them will die or go blind. The forest has remained unchanged for millions of years, a Cretaceous time capsule where plants that existed before flowers evolved still grow. The canopy is so dense that rain can take 20 minutes to reach the ground, dripping through leaves that funnel water directly to roots. Black parrots, found nowhere else on Earth, feed on the palm fruits, their beaks specially adapted to crack foods other birds can't touch. Early explorers thought this was the original Garden of Eden, and walking through the cathedral-like palm groves, where light filters green and gold through leaves 14 meters long, the idea seems less fanciful than observant. The forest floor is almost bare, the palms so efficient at capturing light that little else can grow beneath them. New Zealand's Milford Sound receives 7 meters of rainfall annually, creating hundreds of temporary waterfalls that appear only during rain. On wet days, which is most days, the fjord's walls become liquid, water cascading from heights that turn it to mist before reaching the sea. The rain creates a permanent layer of fresh water floating on the salt water, tannin stained from forest runoff, creating an unusual darkness that allows deep water species to live near the surface. Black coral, normally found at depths of 100 meters, grows here at just 10 meters, tricked by the darkness into thinking it's deeper. Captain Cook sailed past the entrance twice without seeing it, the opening hidden by overlapping mountains that create an optical illusion of continuous coastline. The sound isn't actually a sound, but a fjord carved by glaciers, not rivers, reaching depths of 400 meters, while only 2 kilometers wide. Dolphins have learned to surf the tour boat wakes, appearing on schedule for the entertainment of visitors and perhaps their own amusement. Tree avalanches periodically strip entire mountainsides bare, the regrowth creating vertical stripes of different aged forest. The Azores archipelago sits at the junction of 3 tectonic plates, with new volcanic islands potentially forming in the future. These 9 islands are the peaks of massive underwater mountains, some of the tallest on Earth when measured from the seafloor. The islands are so isolated that many species arrived by wind or wing and evolved into forms found nowhere else, each island a separate evolutionary experiment. Hydrothermal vents on São Miguel cook food buried in the ground, a traditional meal called cozido cooked by the earth itself. The lakes in volcanic craters change colors with the seasons, algae and minerals creating blue, green, or even red water, depending on temperature and light. Sperm whales congregate in the deep waters between islands, using underwater canyons as hunting grounds for giant squid in battles no human has witnessed. The islands are moving apart at 2 centimeters per year, the Atlantic slowly widening, though new volcanic activity could create new islands faster than the old ones separate. Stone walls built without mortar crisscross the landscape, protecting crops from wind so constant that trees grow horizontally. Lake Annecy in France is Europe's cleanest lake due to strict environmental regulations implemented in the 1960s. The lake is so pure that you can see 14 meters deep, clarity that makes boats appear to float in air. This purity isn't natural, but earned through decades of effort after pollution nearly killed the lake in the 1950s. Now swans glide across water that meets drinking standards, and medieval towns reflect so perfectly that their images seem more real than the buildings themselves. The lake formed 18,000 years ago when glaciers melted, leaving a basin surrounded by mountains that protect it from strong winds, creating a mirror more often than not. Paragliders launch from the peaks above, their colorful wings reflecting in water so still that up and down become philosophical questions. The lake has thermoclines so distinct that swimmers can feel the temperature drop 10 degrees by diving just a meter deeper. In winter, the lake rarely freezes, despite alpine temperatures, its depth storing summer warmth like a battery. The purity has revealed Roman ruins on the lakebed, preserved by cold and absence of algae that would normally hide them. Tasmania has the world's cleanest air, measured at Cape Grim, where the wind has traveled 16,000 kilometers across the Southern Ocean. This air has circled Antarctica without passing over any landmass, making it the baseline for measuring global atmospheric changes. Scientists bottle this air to calibrate instruments and as a reference for what atmosphere without human influence tastes like. The Cape is named grimly appropriate. The winds here can exceed 200 kilometers per hour, and the seas below have claimed countless ships. The air is so clean that lichens grow faster here than anywhere else, some colonies centuries old and still expanding. You can see individual light rays when sun breaks through clouds, the absence of particles making light behave differently. Breathing here feels different. Lungs accustomed to city air, suddenly aware of what they've been missing. The monitoring station has been measuring air since 1976, its records showing the steady rise of greenhouse gases, even in Earth's cleanest air. Local Tasmanian devils hunt in the windswept grass, one of the last places these endangered marsupials thrive. The Bay of Fundy, between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, experiences the world's highest tides, with water levels changing by up to 16 meters. Twice daily, 100 billion tons of water flow in and out of the bay, more than all the world's rivers combined. At low tide, you can walk on the ocean floor, finding whale bones and shipwrecks usually buried under 16 meters of water. 6 hours later, that same spot is deeper than a 4-story building is tall. The tides are so powerful, they reverse river flows, creating tidal bores that surf upstream for kilometers. The constant mixing of nutrients makes these waters incredibly productive, feeding whales, seabirds, and fish in quantities that seem impossible. Rocks sculpted by centuries of tidal action look like abstract art, worn into shapes that change depending on your viewing angle. The Hopewell rocks, covered at high tide, become islands at low tide, their tree-topped summits creating a forest that appears to float. Local Mi'kmaq legends speak of whales that turn to stone, and at certain tides, the rocks do look like breaching whales frozen mid-leap. Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania has 5 distinct climate zones from base to summit, like traveling from the equator to Antarctica. Starting in tropical rainforest, climbers pass through heath, moorland, alpine desert, and finally Arctic conditions at the summit, experiencing 50 degrees of temperature change. Each zone has its own weather, often visible as distinct cloud layers wrapping the mountain at different heights. Elephants roam the lower forests, while Arctic conditions reign just 30 kilometers away vertically. The glaciers at the summit are 11,000 years old, but shrinking so rapidly they may disappear within decades, turning Africa's crowned mountain bare. The mountain is actually 3 volcanic cones, though only Kibo, the highest, is dormant rather than extinct, steam still escaping from fumaroles near the summit. Plants here grow nowhere else, like giant groundsels that look like palm trees crossed with cabbages, adapted to freezing nights and blazing days. Chaga people have lived on the mountain slopes for 400 years, developing irrigation systems that channel glacial melt through hand-dug tunnels. The summit sign at Uhuru Peak is the most photographed point in Africa, though most who see it are too altitude-sick to enjoy the view. Lake Ohrid between North Macedonia and Albania is 3 million years old, making it Europe's oldest lake. This age has allowed evolution to create over 200 endemic species, found nowhere else on Earth, a freshwater Galapagos that predates most lakes by millions of years. The lake is so deep and clear that UNESCO protects it as both natural and cultural heritage, one of only 28 sites with dual designation. Ohrid trout, which can grow to 10 kilograms, have been isolated here so long they're genetically unique, living fossils that swim through classical antiquity. The water is so clear because underground springs provide 25% of its water, filtered through limestone for decades before emerging. Churches and monasteries perch on cliffs above the water, some built on Roman temples, themselves built on prehistoric sacred sites, layers of worship looking at the same eternal view. The lake has its own microclimate, mild enough that figs and pomegranates grow at latitudes that should be too cold. In certain lights, the water appears black, earning its ancient name, Lychnidos, meaning lake of light, a paradox that somehow makes perfect sense. The Hebrides of Scotland include 790 islands, though only 94 are permanently inhabited by humans. These islands stretch like stepping stones into the Atlantic, each one a different world with its own weather, wildlife, and stories. Some islands are connected at low tide, but become separate worlds when the sea returns, relationships defined by water. The Gaelic language survived here when it died elsewhere, protected by water from the homogenizing influence of the mainland. Seals outnumber humans on most islands, and some beaches sing when walked upon, the sand grains creating harmonic frequencies. The islands experience horizontal rain, wind so strong it pushes water sideways, making umbrellas not just useless, but dangerous. Stone circles older than Stonehenge dot the islands, their purpose lost, but their presence still commanding respect. Some islands have been abandoned and recolonized multiple times over millennia, layers of habitation visible in the soil. The edge of the continental shelf is just west of the outer islands, where the seafloor plunges from 200 meters to 2,000 meters, creating upwellings that feed millions of seabirds. Crater Lake in Oregon formed 7,700 years ago when Mount Mazama collapsed, creating the deepest lake in the United States at 592 meters. The collapse was so violent, it scattered ash as far as Saskatchewan, and Native American stories still describe the battle between mountain spirits that destroyed Mazama. No rivers flow in or out. The lake is filled entirely by rain and snow, making it some of the purest water on Earth. The blue color is so intense it seems artificial, caused by the depth and purity, allowing only blue wavelengths to escape. Wizard Island, a volcanic cone rising from the lake, is itself a volcano within a volcano, with its own crater at the summit. The lake maintains a constant temperature at depth, never freezing despite receiving 15 meters of snow annually. Old Man of the Lake, a 9-meter tree stump, has been floating vertically for over 100 years, moving around the lake with winds but always remaining upright. Fish were introduced in the 1800s, before which the lake contained no fish, a body of water too pure for life. The rim rises 2,400 meters above sea level, often above the clouds, creating the illusion of a lake floating in the sky. The Whitsunday Islands of Australia consist of 74 islands, most uninhabited, with pure silica sand that doesn't heat up in the sun. This sand, 98% pure silica, is so fine it squeaks when walked upon and can damage cameras and phones by infiltrating their mechanisms. The sand arrived here from far inland, carried by rivers over millions of years, sorted by size and purity during its journey. Whitehaven Beach's sand is so pure, it was used to make the Hubble telescope's lenses. The swirling patterns where tide meets beach create temporary artworks that last only until the next tide. Manta rays glide through the shallows, their wingspans wider than people are tall, seeming to fly through liquid air. The islands are the peaks of drowned mountains, part of the same formation as the Great Dividing Range on the mainland. Captain Cook sailed through during Whitsunday, hence the name, though he was actually a day off due to not accounting for the international dateline. Humpback whales use the warm, protected waters as nurseries, teaching their calves to breach in safety before facing the open ocean. Lake Kawaguchi in Japan perfectly reflects Mount Fuji on calm days, creating the iconic double Fuji image. This reflection has been painted and photographed so often, it's become more famous than the actual view, the image more real than reality. The lake is one of Fuji's 5 lakes, formed when lava flows dammed rivers, creating natural mirrors for the sacred mountain. Morning mists create layers of visibility, Fuji appearing and disappearing, like a meditation on permanence and change. The lake never freezes despite winter temperatures well below zero, hot springs warming the water from below. Cherry blossoms line the shores, their brief blooming framing Fuji in pink for just 2 weeks each spring. The reflection changes with seasons. Snow-capped Fuji in winter, green Fuji in summer, each version a different mountain. Fishermen have worked these waters for centuries, their techniques unchanged, pulling the same species their ancestors caught. The lake is artificial in parts, expanded by dams, but the reflection remains natural, geometry between mountain and water that humans can alter but not improve. The Greek island of Ikaria has one of the world's longest living populations, with 1 in 3 residents reaching 90 years old. Something about this island slows aging, though scientists can't agree what. The diet, the steep terrain that demands daily exercise, or the culture that ignores clocks. The island has radioactive hot springs that residents have bathed in for millennia, believing in their healing powers despite or because of the radiation. Time moves differently here. Shops open when owners feel like it, and the concept of being late doesn't translate to the local dialect. The terrain is so mountainous that many villages were isolated for centuries, developing their own variations of Greek recipes and ways of life. Wild herbs grow everywhere, and locals make tea from whatever is growing, creating medicine from the landscape. The island was named for Icarus, who fell into the sea nearby, and something about that myth of reaching too high seems to have taught residents to aim for longevity rather than achievement. Wine flows freely at any hour, and afternoon naps are sacred, the entire island sleeping through the heat of the day. Banks Island in Canada's Arctic has the world's largest concentration of muskoxen, about 68,000 animals on one island. These prehistoric-looking creatures, unchanged since the Pleistocene, thrive in conditions that would kill most mammals. Their wool, kiviot, is 8 times warmer than sheep's wool and softer than cashmere, allowing them to survive temperatures below -40 degrees. When threatened, muskoxen form defensive circles, adults facing outward, young protected in the center, a strategy that worked against wolves, but not against human hunters. The island has 24-hour daylight in summer and 24-hour darkness in winter, extremes that most life can't tolerate. No trees grow here, just Arctic willow that reaches ankle height after centuries of growth. The permafrost contains mammoths and other Ice Age animals, occasionally exposed by warming temperatures, creating a landscape where past and present intermingle. Peary caribou, the smallest caribou subspecies, share the island, their population cycling mysteriously with the muskoxen. The island is so remote that some valleys have never been explored, blank spots on maps in an age when every square meter of Earth has been photographed from space. Lake Wakatipu in New Zealand has a unique standing wave that causes the water level to rise and fall 12 centimeters every 5 minutes. Maori legend says this is the heartbeat of a giant demon burned in the lake, his heart still beating at the bottom. Science says it's a seiche, caused by atmospheric pressure and wind, but the rhythm is so regular, it does feel like a pulse. The lake is shaped like a lightning bolt, 80 kilometers long but never more than 5 kilometers wide, carved by glaciers into a perfect Z. The water is so pure and cold that trees that fall in are preserved for centuries, becoming waterlogged but not decomposing. The Remarkable's mountain range rises directly from the eastern shore, so steep that snow avalanches directly into the lake. Despite being inland, the lake has tides, small but measurable, the moon pulling at fresh water as it does the sea. Gold miners in the 1860s reported seeing a monster in the lake, and while no monster has been confirmed, the lake does hide enormous eels, some over 100 years old and 2 meters long. The TSS Earnslaw, a 1912 steamship, still cruises the lake, burning a ton of coal an hour, its smoke the only cloud in valleys too steep for weather. The Lofoten Islands in Norway sit 200 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle, yet have temperatures rarely below -5 degrees due to the Gulf Stream. This oceanic river of warm water makes the islands 25 degrees warmer than other places at the same latitude, creating an Arctic paradise that shouldn't exist. Mountains rise directly from the sea, no gentle slopes, just vertical granite walls that make the islands look like a 160-kilometer-long wall. The midnight sun in summer and polar night in winter create a landscape that's either always light or always dark. No middle ground. Stockfish, cod dried on wooden racks called yell, has been produced here for 1,000 years, the Arctic wind and temperature creating perfect drying conditions. The water is so clear that kelp forests are visible 20 meters down, swaying in currents like underwater trees. Northern lights reflect off the sea on winter nights, creating double auroras, one in the sky and one in the water. Fishing villages cling to tiny flat spots between mountain and sea, connected by bridges that arc impossibly over fjords. The islands are moving northwest at 2 centimeters per year, slowly heading toward the pole they're already inside. Lake Atitlan in Guatemala is surrounded by 3 volcanoes and reaches depths that have never been accurately measured. Divers have descended 340 meters without finding the bottom, their lights swallowed by water so dark it seems solid. The lake fills a massive caldera created by an eruption 84,000 years ago, so violent it covered Costa Rica in ash. The 3 volcanoes, Atitlan, Toliman, and San Pedro, stand like guardians, their perfect cones reflected in water that changes from blue to green to gray with the weather. Maya villages dot the shores, each maintaining different traditions, different traditional dress, as if the lake creates cultural islands as well as physical ones. The water level rises and falls mysteriously, sometimes by several meters over years, submerging and revealing ruins of ancient settlements. Thermal vents deep below create currents that pull swimmers down, leading locals to speak of Zokamil, the wind that carries away sin and sometimes sinners. The lake has no visible outlet, yet maintains its level through underground channels that scientists still don't fully understand. Morning mists rise from the water, wrapping the volcanoes in clouds that make them appear and disappear, like thoughts becoming solid, then fading. Prince Edward Island in Canada has soil so red from iron oxide that potatoes grown there have a distinct reddish skin. This red earth, visible from space, comes from high iron content, oxidizing over millennia, essentially rusting the entire island. The soil is so distinctive that islanders traveling abroad have been stopped at customs, officials suspicious of the red dirt on their shoes. Potatoes grown here have a unique flavor, the iron adding an earthiness that can't be replicated elsewhere. The red roads, unpaved in many places, turn to sticky mud in rain and fine dust in drought, marking everything and everyone with the island's signature color. Farmers say you can taste the island in the potatoes, the red soil becoming part of the vegetable itself. The contrast between red earth, green fields, and blue ocean creates a palette so vivid it seems enhanced. Rain pools reflect the sky but rimmed with red, as if the earth is bleeding into water. The soil is constantly eroding into the sea, turning coastal waters pink after storms, the island literally dissolving, feeding itself to the ocean grain by grain. The Aegean Sea contains 3,000 islands and islets, though only 87 are inhabited year-round. Some islands are so small they disappear at high tide, existing only part-time, geographical maybes. The sea is where Europe meets Asia, where ancient trade routes cross, where history accumulated in layers like sediment. Each island developed its own variation of Greek culture, preserved by water barriers that made near neighbors foreign. Some islands are bare rock, others covered in pine forests that smell like resin in the heat. The water is so clear, you can see ancient amphorae on the seafloor, trade goods that never reached their destination, now homes for octopi. The islands create a wind pattern called the meltemi, summer gales that ancient sailors both feared and used, knowing the winds would blow steadily for days. Volcanic islands still steam and bubble, reminding everyone that the Aegean is geologically alive, still reshaping itself. Dolphins follow ferries between islands, using the boat's wakes for play, or perhaps just enjoying the company. The sea changes color with depth and bottom, from pale turquoise over sand to deep purple over abyssal trenches, a liquid rainbow that never quite repeats. Lake Taupo in New Zealand was formed by a super eruption 26,500 years ago that ejected 1,170 cubic kilometers of material. This eruption was so massive it changed global weather for years, and ash from it has been found in Antarctica. The lake that fills the caldera is deceptively peaceful, its blue waters giving no hint of the violence that created them. Beneath the surface, geothermal vents still bubble, reminding visitors this is not a dead volcano, but a sleeping one. The lake is so large, it has its own horizon, creating the illusion of an inland sea. Trout introduced in the 1800s grow to enormous size, fed by volcanic minerals that enrich the water. Hot streams flow into cold lake water, creating pockets where tropical plants grow in temperate climate. The caldera is slowly bulging upward, rising a few millimeters per year, the magma chamber refilling for an eruption perhaps thousands of years away. Maori carvings at Mine Bay can only be seen from the water, 14-meter-high artwork carved into cliffs, watching over waters their creators considered sacred. Float planes land and take off from the surface, the lake serving as a 616 square kilometer runway. Madagascar's Avenue of the Baobabs features trees that are 800 years old, and store up to 120,000 liters of water in their trunks. These trees, called upside-down trees because their branches look like roots reaching for the sky, stand like monuments to persistence. Each tree is essentially a vertical reservoir, its trunks swelling with water during the wet season, shrinking during drought. The avenue wasn't planned, but is the remnant of a forest cleared for agriculture, these giants too valuable and too difficult to remove. At sunset, the trees cast shadows hundreds of meters long, turning the landscape into a sundial that has marked time for centuries. The bark feels like cork, soft and fire-resistant, scarred by centuries of elephant rubbing. Some trunks are so large that people have lived inside hollow ones, natural houses that stay cool in heat and warm in cold. Local Sakalava people believe baobabs don't die but simply disappear, and indeed, dead baobabs seem to implode rather than fall, leaving little trace. The trees flower at night, blooms lasting only 24 hours, pollinated by bats that navigate by echolocation between the massive trunks. The Stockholm archipelago contains 30,000 islands and skerries, with new ones appearing as land rises 5 millimeters per year. This post-glacial rebound, the Earth's crust slowly rising after Ice Age glaciers melted, creates new land continuously, maps becoming outdated within a generation. Some skerries appear and disappear with tides and seasons, geographical uncertainties that challenge the definition of island. The archipelago extends 60 kilometers from Stockholm, a maze of water and rock that only locals can navigate confidently. Summer houses dot the larger islands, many accessible only by boat, creating a culture where water is the primary highway. The granite bedrock, scoured smooth by glaciers, creates natural swimming pools that sun warms to comfortable temperatures. Each island has its own microclimate and ecosystem, some supporting forests, others just hardy grasses that survive salt spray. Vikings used these waters as highways and hiding places, their runes still visible on rock faces. The archipelago freezes in severe winters, creating an ice road network that completely changes transportation patterns. Seals pup on outer skerries, and white-tailed eagles nest on islands uninhabited since the plague depopulated them 700 years ago. Lake Malawi contains more fish species than any other lake, with over 1,000 types of cichlids found nowhere else. This evolutionary explosion happened in just 2 million years, making it one of the fastest speciations ever documented. Each rocky outcrop has its own endemic species, fish that exist nowhere else, not even elsewhere in the same lake. The water is so clear you can see 20 meters deep, watching clouds of colorful fish that look more like a coral reef than a freshwater lake. The cichlids have evolved every possible feeding strategy: algae scrapers, snail crushers, scale eaters, even species that feed only on the eyes of other fish. Fishermen use traditional methods unchanged for centuries, while below them swims biodiversity that scientists are still cataloging. The lake is meromictic, its deep layers never mixing with surface water, creating distinct zones with different chemistry and life. Local people call it the Calendar Lake, being 365 miles long and 52 miles wide at its widest point. Millions depend on the lake for protein, yet new species are discovered regularly, evolution continuing in real time beneath fishing boats. The Outer Banks of North Carolina are moving westward at about 5 meters per year as sand shifts from ocean to sound side. These barrier islands are essentially a 320-kilometer-long sandbar, constantly reshaping itself in response to waves, wind, and storms. Houses that were oceanfront become soundfront over decades, then sometimes oceanfront again as inlets open and close. The Wright brothers chose Kitty Hawk for flight experiments because of constant winds that also constantly move the islands. Wild horses, descendants of Spanish shipwrecks, have adapted to drinking salt water and eating seagrass. The islands have moved so much that the Cape Hatteras lighthouse had to be relocated 900 meters inland in 1999 and will need moving again eventually. Hurricanes can move the islands dozens of meters in hours, what normally takes years happening in a single storm. The sand isn't local, but arrives from rivers hundreds of kilometers north, carried by longshore drift in an endless conveyor. Pirates once used these shifting sands to their advantage, knowing channels that appeared and disappeared with storms. Some islands have disappeared entirely since European colonization, while others have merged or split. Norfolk Island's pine trees grow perfectly straight up to 60 meters tall and exist naturally only on this Pacific island. These trees, despite their name, aren't actually pines, but ancient araucarias, relatives of trees that fed dinosaurs. They grow with such geometric precision, they look artificial, each branch emerging at the same angle, creating perfect symmetry. Captain Cook's crew used them as masts, their straight grain and height ideal for sailing ships. The trees were nearly extinct by 1960, down to just one small grove, but have since recovered and been planted worldwide as ornamentals. On Norfolk Island, they create a canopy so dense that little grows beneath them, the forest floor carpeted only with their needle-like leaves. The trees can live 200 years, growing steadily upward their entire lives, never branching randomly like other trees. Salt spray from the surrounding ocean has shaped their evolution, making them incredibly resistant to coastal conditions. Young trees are perfect triangles, mathematical precision in botanical form. The seeds are so large that only large birds could disperse them. But those birds are extinct, so now humans serve as the tree's primary seed dispersers. Lake Minnewanka in Canada's Banff National Park has an underwater ghost town submerged when the dam was built in 1941. The resort town of Minnewanka Landing lies 30 meters underwater, its buildings, streets, and bridge perfectly preserved in the cold, dark water. Scuba divers can swim through the town, exploring houses where furniture still sits in place, preserved by water too cold for much decay. The original dam, built in 1912, raised water levels by 3 meters. The 1941 dam added another 30 meters, drowning the already relocated town completely. Indigenous peoples called it Lake of the Water Spirit, believing something powerful lived in its depths, a belief that seems prescient given what now lies below. The lake freezes so thick in winter that trucks can drive on it, while far below, the ghost town sits in permanent liquid darkness. Fish swim through what were once streets, and algae grows on what were once walls. The dam was built for Calgary's power needs, trading a town for electricity. Some divers report seeing lights in the submerged buildings, though this is impossible. More likely, their own lights reflecting off windows that have remained unbroken for 80 years. The Kornati Islands of Croatia include 147 mostly uninhabited islands with more coastline than the Croatian mainland. These islands are almost entirely barren rock, looking like the moon placed in the Adriatic Sea. Vegetation was stripped centuries ago by sheep, and the limestone rock remains bare. White islands and blue sea. The islands are so maze-like that Roman writers described them as a labyrinth created by gods to confuse sailors. No fresh water exists on most islands, yet shepherds lived here for centuries, collecting rainwater in carved stone cisterns. The underwater topography mirrors the above, with cliffs continuing straight down 100 meters below the surface. The islands create a current pattern so complex that the water between them can flow in opposite directions simultaneously. Stone walls built without mortar crisscross even uninhabited islands, boundaries for sheep that no longer exist. The crown jewel is the island of Cornat, with cliffs on one side and gentle slopes on the other, as if the island is perpetually tilting into the sea. Fish congregate in the channels between islands, the currents bringing constant food, making this one of the Adriatic's most productive fishing grounds. Lake Turkana in Kenya is the world's largest permanent desert lake and the world's largest alkaline lake. This jade-green lake in the Great Rift Valley exists where no lake should, surrounded by volcanic desert where temperatures reach 50 degrees Celsius. The water is so alkaline that it feels soapy, and only specially adapted fish and algae can survive. 3 rivers feed it, but no river drains it. Water leaves only through evaporation, concentrating minerals over millennia. Crocodiles here grow larger than anywhere else in Africa, some exceeding 6 meters, prehistoric monsters in an equally prehistoric landscape. The lake level fluctuates wildly, sometimes by 10 meters between years, following rainfall patterns thousands of kilometers away in Ethiopia. Volcanic islands in the lake still steam, and one, central island, contains 3 crater lakes of its own, lakes within an island within a lake. Strong winds create waves 2 meters high, dangerous for the traditional fishing boats that have worked these waters for thousands of years. Fossils found along the shores include early human ancestors, making this one of humanity's birthplaces. The lake is shrinking as Ethiopia diverts its feeding rivers, possibly disappearing entirely within a century. Reunion Island in the Indian Ocean has one of the world's most active volcanoes, erupting on average every 9 months. Piton de la Fournaise, Peak of the Furnace, is so active it has added 100 hectares to the island since 1980, lava flows reaching the ocean and cooling into new land. The volcano is unusually safe for such an active one, its lava flows predictable enough that viewing areas are built close to active flows. The island formed from a hot spot, the same one that created Mauritius and the Deccan Traps in India, as the Indo-Australian plate moved over it. Half the island is an extinct volcano, Piton de Neige, creating a landscape split between ancient erosion and active creation. Rainfall varies from 12 meters annually on the east coast to less than 1 meter on the west, all within 63 kilometers. This rain has carved cirques, volcanic amphitheaters so perfect they look designed, accessible only by foot. The island has more endemic species than the Galapagos relative to its size, evolution accelerated by isolation, and volcanic soil. Vanilla originated here before being transplanted to Madagascar, and the best vanilla still comes from vines grown in volcanic soil. The Thousand Islands between Canada and the USA actually number 1,864, with some islands containing just a single tree. To qualify as an island, the land must be above water 365 days a year and support at least 1 tree, a definition that creates some very small islands. The smallest inhabited island, Just Room Enough Island, is exactly large enough for a house and a tree. Millionaire's Row features castles built on private islands during the Gilded Age, accessible only by boat, creating the most exclusive neighborhood possible. The islands formed when glacier-carved valleys flooded, as Ice Age glaciers retreated, hilltops becoming islands. Some islands are in Canada, others in the USA, requiring boaters to carry passports and clear customs when island hopping. The water is so clear in places that shipwrecks from the 1800s are visible from the surface, preserved by cold, fresh water. During Prohibition, the islands were perfect for smuggling. their maze-like arrangement making law enforcement nearly impossible. Every island has its own microclimate, some supporting species found nowhere else in the region, 1,864 separate experiments in island biogeography. Lake Prespa, shared by Albania, Greece, and North Macedonia, sits 150 meters higher than nearby Lake Ohrid, connected by underground channels. Water flows from Prespa to Ohrid through karst caves, taking decades to make the journey, filtered through limestone until it emerges crystal clear. The lakes were once one body of water until tectonic activity separated them, siblings divided by geology. Prespa hosts one of Europe's largest pelican colonies, thousands of birds nesting on floating reed islands. The lake has two islands, one with a ruined Bulgarian czar's fortress, the other with Albanian political prisoners' graves. The borders of three countries meet in the middle of the lake, an aquatic tripoint where nationality becomes fluid. Byzantine emperors vacationed here, building monasteries on the islands that still stand, frescoes somehow surviving centuries of humidity. The lake shrinks each summer, exposing prehistoric settlement ruins usually underwater, then refills with autumn rains, drowning history again. Local fishermen use fishing methods unchanged since Roman times, the fish species also unchanged, as if the lake exists outside time. The underground connection to Ohrid was only proven in 1976 using dye traces, confirming what locals always knew. The Finnish lakeland contains 188,000 lakes larger than 5 square meters, covering 10% of the country's area. From above, Finland looks shattered, more water than land in places, a country that can't decide if it's terrestrial or aquatic. The lakes formed when Ice Age glaciers carved countless depressions, then melted to fill them, leaving a landscape like frozen splash patterns. Some lakes are connected by rivers so short they're just rapids between lakes, water rushing from one basin to another. In winter, the lakes become roads, official ice highways marked with small pine trees, connecting communities that are isolated in summer. The lakes moderate temperature so effectively that agriculture extends farther north here than anywhere else at this latitude. Each lake has its own fish populations, sometimes unique subspecies evolved in isolation since the Ice Age. Saunas sit on almost every inhabited lakeshore. The Finnish ritual of hot sauna followed by cold lake plunge repeated millions of times daily across the country. The lakes are so numerous that many remain unnamed, known only by numbers in government databases, anonymous water waiting for significance. Lake Victoria in Africa is so large it creates its own weather patterns, including thunderstorms that occur 242 days per year. The lake is essentially an inland sea. It's 68,000 square kilometers, affecting climate hundreds of kilometers away. These thunderstorms are among Earth's most intense, with more lightning strikes per square kilometer than almost anywhere else. The storms form so regularly, you can set clocks by them, building each afternoon as the sun heats the vast water surface. Despite being on the equator, the lake has tides, small but measurable, the moon pulling at fresh water as it does oceans. Over 200 species of fish have gone extinct since the 1950s, casualties of introduced Nile perch that grew to 200 kilograms, ecosystem collapse in real time. 3 countries share the lake, but it feels like its own nation, with distinct customs, boats, and fishing methods evolved over millennia. Islands in the lake have chimpanzees that use tools differently than mainland populations, evolution and culture diverging in isolation. The lake is only 400,000 years old, young geologically, yet has produced more species than ancient lakes. Evolution in fast forward. Bermuda sits on the remains of a volcanic seamount that erupted 33 million years ago and is now covered by limestone cap. The volcano is extinct. its peak now 75 meters below sea level. Everything above is coral growth and wind-blown sand. The islands are the most isolated in the Atlantic, 1,000 kilometers from the nearest land, yet were uninhabited when discovered in 1505. The limestone cap creates caves throughout the islands, many flooded with crystal-clear seawater, underground swimming pools decorated with stalactites. Pink sand beaches get their color from foraminifera, tiny organisms with red shells mixed with white coral and shell fragments. The island sits on the edge of the Sargasso Sea, that strange calm within the Atlantic, making Bermuda feel even more isolated. No rivers or lakes exist. All freshwater comes from rain collected on roofs, every building a water collector. The Bermuda petrel, thought extinct for 300 years, was rediscovered in 1951, now breeding on offshore islets. Hurricane season transforms the island from paradise to battlefield as location makes it a target for Atlantic storms tracking up the Gulf Stream. Lake Issyk-Kul in Kyrgyzstan never freezes despite being surrounded by snow-capped mountains due to its slight salinity. The name means warm lake in Kyrgyz. The warm is relative at 1,600 meters elevation, where winter air temperatures reach -20 degrees. The lake is so deep and saline that it maintains a constant temperature at depth, storing summer heat through winter. Ancient Silk Road cities lie submerged along its shores, revealed occasionally when water levels drop, complete with pottery and tools. The lake has no outlet, yet maintains a constant level through perfect balance of inflow and evaporation, nature's precision engineering. Snow leopards hunt along the shores, one of the few places these mountain cats descend to near water level. The lake basin is tectonically active, earthquakes occasionally generating tsunamis in this landlocked sea. Soviet torpedo testing in the lake has left unexploded ordnance on the bottom, making certain areas dangerous for divers. Petroglyphs around the lake show it has been sacred for millennia, scenes of hunting and worship carved when the water level was different, some now submerged, viewable only by diving. The San Juan Islands of Washington State include 428 islands at low tide, but only 128 at high tide. This mathematical impossibility exists because tides here can vary by 4 meters, drowning and revealing land twice daily, geography that can't make up its mind. The islands are scattered like green confetti across the Salish Sea, each one a different world despite being visible from its neighbors. Orcas patrol the channels between islands, their dorsal fins slicing through water so rich with salmon that indigenous peoples called this the place where salmon come home. The islands exist in a rain shadow, receiving half the precipitation of Seattle just 100 kilometers away, creating a microclimate more Mediterranean than Pacific Northwest. Some islands have single owners, private kingdoms accessed only by boat or seaplane. Others host communities that communicate more by marine radio than telephone. The geology tells of violent origins, oceanic crust scraped onto the continent and twisted into impossible angles. Eagles nest on every major island, more breeding pairs than most states have total. Friday Harbor's population swells 1,000% in summer, then returns to a few hundred souls who prefer isolation to convenience. Bioluminescence lights the water on summer nights, each paddle stroke creating liquid fire. Lake Tanganyika in Africa contains 16% of the world's available fresh water and is the second deepest lake at 1,470 meters. This ancient rift lake, 12 million years old, has accumulated life and water in layers that haven't mixed in centuries. Below 200 meters, the water is anoxic, without oxygen, a liquid underworld where only bacteria survive. The lake is so long, 673 kilometers, that it has different weather at each end. storms at the north while the south lies calm. Fish here have evolved shells, the only known freshwater snails with this adaptation, armor against predators in an evolutionary arms race. The lake contains more than 350 species of fish found nowhere else, each river mouth hosting unique species that don't venture even kilometers away. Crocodiles here grow massive but shy, diving to depths unusual for reptiles, hunting in 3 dimensions. Fishing villages use methods unchanged since before European contact, wooden boats and hemp nets catching the same species their ancestors did. The lake is meromictic, its layers distinct as a layer cake, each depth a different era, different chemistry, different world. Storm waves can reach 6 meters, earning local names that translate to the sea that thunders. Lord Howe Island allows only 400 tourists at a time to preserve its ecosystem where 75% of plants are endemic. This crescent-shaped remnant of a 7-million-year-old volcano enforces isolation as policy, turning exclusivity into conservation. The island's famous pyramidal peaks, Mount Gower and Mount Lidgebird, rise directly from the sea, creating their own weather, wrapping themselves in clouds even on clear days. Walking beneath the endemic Kentia palms, which exist wild nowhere else on Earth, feels like stepping into a world before human influence. The island's stick insects, thought extinct for 80 years, were rediscovered in 2001 living under a single shrub on Ball's Pyramid, a nearby sea stack. From those 24 individuals, a breeding program has brought them back from near extinction. No mobile phone coverage exists here by choice, the island maintaining deliberate disconnection from the modern world. The surrounding waters contain the world's southernmost coral reef, where tropical and temperate species mingle in combinations found nowhere else. Cars are almost absent. Bicycles and walking maintain a pace that matches the island's philosophy. Every visitor must pay an environmental levy, funding conservation of species that exist nowhere else, a tax on curiosity that preserves wonder. The Great Lakes contain 21% of Earth's surface fresh water and have their own maritime climate, affecting weather 50 kilometers inland. These inland seas are so vast, they generate weather systems, lake-effect snow burying cities in meters of powder when cold air masses cross the warmer water. Ships disappear here as mysteriously as in any ocean, the Edmund Fitzgerald just one of 6,000 wrecks on the bottom. Fresh water so cold it preserves bodies and boats for centuries. The lakes are young, formed just 14,000 years ago as glaciers retreated. Infants in geological time, yet already they've developed their own ecosystems, weather patterns, even tides. Storm waves can reach 10 meters, higher than many ocean storms, fresh water behaving like salt water when given enough space. The lakes moderate temperature so effectively that wine grapes grow along their shores at latitudes that should be too cold, creating unexpected vineyards in snow country. Lake Superior alone could cover North and South America in a foot of water. The lakes don't freeze uniformly. Some bays become solid while open water remains, creating ice roads that exist alongside shipping channels. Native peoples called them the Sweetwater Seas, understanding their ocean-like nature while appreciating the drinkable difference. Madeira Island's laurel forest is 20 million years old, a remnant of forests that once covered southern Europe. This Laurisilva forest survived ice ages that destroyed its continental cousins, protected by the ocean's moderating influence and volcanic soil that never froze. Walking through these forests feels like time travel. Ferns and mosses that elsewhere exist only as fossils thriving in perpetual mist. The trees drip constantly, even without rain, harvesting moisture from clouds that wrap the mountains daily. This fog catching creates 30% more precipitation than rainfall alone, the forest watering itself. Endemic pigeons here are the last of their lineage, descendants of birds that flew over forests stretching from Portugal to Turkey. The levadas, irrigation channels carved into mountainsides centuries ago, thread through the forest for 3,000 kilometers, creating walking paths through prehistory. Some trees are thought to be 800 years old, though aging them is difficult as they don't form clear annual rings in this constant growing season. The forest floor is so thick with organic matter that new trees grow on fallen ones, creating multi-story architecture of living and dead wood. The forest survived human colonization, volcanic eruptions, and introduced species, 20 million years of persistence in just 740 square kilometers. Lake Eyre in Australia fills completely only a few times per century, transforming from salt desert to inland sea. When the rains come to Queensland, sometimes thousands of kilometers away, water flows toward Lake Eyre through river systems that are usually dry, a continental drainage that can take months to arrive. The lake bed, 15 meters below sea level, is covered in salt crust so thick you can drive on it, and land speed records have been set on its surface. When water arrives, the transformation is magical. Millions of pelicans appear, somehow knowing from across the continent that the lake has filled. Nobody understands how they know. Lake Eyre might fill only 3 times in a human lifetime. The water brings brine shrimp eggs that have waited decades in the salt, hatching in billions, turning the water pink with life. Fish appear in waters where no fish should exist, carried as eggs on birds' feet, or washed from permanent water sources hundreds of kilometers away. The lake can cover 9,500 square kilometers when full, becoming Australia's largest lake, then evaporate to nothing within 2 years. Aboriginal stories speak of the lake as a living thing that breathes in and out over generations, inhaling water, exhaling salt. The Channel Islands of California have 145 endemic species that evolved in isolation just 30 kilometers from the mainland. These islands, never connected to the continent even during ice ages when sea levels dropped, became laboratories for evolution. The island fox, a dwarf descendant of mainland gray foxes, evolved to house cat size, while island scrub jays grew larger than their mainland cousins. Evolution, running different experiments on each island. Pygmy mammoths once lived here. Elephants shrunk by island constraints, their bones still emerging from eroding cliffs. The islands sit at the confluence of warm and cold currents, creating nutrient-rich waters that support more marine life than almost anywhere on the Pacific coast. Giant kelp forests surround the islands, underwater cathedrals where sea lions play, and great whites hunt. Archaeological evidence shows humans lived here for 13,000 years, among the oldest evidence of seafaring in the Americas. Each island has different rules for visitation, some requiring permits months in advance, preserving isolation even in the age of tourism. The marine layer wraps the islands daily, creating a moody landscape that appears and disappears in fog, 8 separate worlds that remain mysterious despite their proximity to millions. Lake Kariba, between Zambia and Zimbabwe, is the world's largest artificial lake by volume, holding 185 cubic kilometers of water. Created by damming the Zambezi River in 1959, it required Operation Noah, the rescue of 6,000 animals from rising waters, elephants and rhinos ferried to safety on boats. The lake is so vast it has its own commercial fishing fleet, and waves during storms can reach 3 meters. Petrified forests stand in the shallows, dead trees that refused to rot, creating an eerie landscape of wooden skeletons reaching from the water. The lake has developed its own ecosystem, with introduced sardines, creating a food chain that now supports communities that once farmed the drowned valley. Crocodiles and hippos thrive in numbers greater than before the dam, the lake providing perfect habitat. Houseboats cruise waters that cover ancestral lands. The Tonga people relocated, but their sacred sites now underwater, visited only by fish. The dam generates power for 2 countries, but the lake's weight has triggered earthquakes, the Earth's crust adjusting to billions of tons of water where none existed before. Tigerfish grow to monster size, a sport fishing industry built on a lake that shouldn't exist. Rottnest Island near Australia is slowly moving north at 7 centimeters per year on the Australian tectonic plate. This movement, imperceptible in a human lifetime, has carried the island from temperate to nearly tropical waters over millions of years. The island is famous for quokkas, marsupials that look like miniature kangaroos with permanent smiles, evolved in isolation with no natural predators. These animals have no fear of humans, posing for selfies that have made them internet famous. The island was connected to the mainland 7,000 years ago when sea levels were lower, but rising waters created isolation that preserved species elsewhere extinct. Salt lakes dot the interior, pink with algae, looking like wounds in the landscape. The island served as an Aboriginal prison for 70 years, a dark history in a place that now markets itself as paradise. Limestone caves honeycomb underground, many flooded with seawater that rises and falls with tides, breathing caves. The surrounding reefs are moving north with the island, coral species gradually changing as waters warm. Dutch explorers named it Rat's Nest Island, mistaking quokkas for giant rats, a naming error that stuck despite the animal's charm. The Inside Passage of Alaska and British Columbia contains 1,000 islands and 25,000 kilometers of coastline. This marine highway between islands and mainland creates protected waters where waves rarely exceed 2 meters, even during storms that rage in the open Pacific. The passage is a drowned mountain range, peaks becoming islands as glaciers melted and sea levels rose. Tides here funnel through narrow passages, creating reversing rapids where water flows uphill, defying intuition. Humpback whales use the passage as a highway, their songs echoing off underwater canyon walls. First Nations peoples navigated these waters for 10,000 years, their oral maps more accurate than early European charts. The coastline is so convoluted that many inlets have never been fully explored, blank spots on maps in the satellite age. Temperate rainforest grows to the water's edge, trees sometimes falling directly into the sea, becoming nurse logs for marine life. Glaciers still reach the water in places, calving icebergs into seas where orcas hunt. The passage creates its own weather, funneling storms or blocking them, each inlet having different rainfall, different seasons. Float planes are the taxis here, landing on water so still it mirrors mountains, doubling the landscape. Lake Vostok in Antarctica lies 4,000 meters under ice and has been isolated from Earth's atmosphere for 15 million years. This subglacial lake, the size of Lake Ontario, exists in permanent darkness at temperatures just below freezing, kept liquid by pressure and geothermal heat. When Russian scientists finally drilled through in 2012, they found water supersaturated with oxygen, 50 times normal levels, a toxic concentration for most Earth life. Yet life exists here. Bacteria, unlike anything else on Earth, evolved in isolation longer than humans have existed. The lake may connect to other subglacial lakes through underwater rivers, a hidden drainage system beneath the ice sheet. The drilling project took 20 years, with fears that contamination could destroy an ecosystem that predates humanity. The water is so pristine it's used to calibrate instruments measuring purity. Some scientists believe conditions here mirror those on Jupiter's moon Europa, making Vostok a testing ground for seeking extraterrestrial life. The pressure is so intense that ice forms differently, creating exotic crystals not found elsewhere on Earth. Above the lake, the ice sheet flows at different speeds, creating stress patterns that reveal the lake's outline from space. Mauritius was formed by volcanic activity 8 million years ago and is surrounded by the world's third largest coral reef. This reef almost entirely encircles the island, creating lagoons of turquoise water protected from ocean swells. The reef is visible from space, a white ring around a green island in blue ocean, looking designed rather than natural. The island formed from a hotspot, the same one that created the reunion as the African plate moved over it. The volcanic soil is so fertile that sugarcane grows without fertilizer, and fruits reach unusual sizes. The island was uninhabited when discovered, a paradise that had never known human footsteps. The dodo evolved here, a flightless bird with no fear of predators because none existed, extinct within 100 years of human arrival. Underwater waterfalls appear off the coast, an optical illusion created by sand and silt flowing into ocean trenches, looking like the sea itself is draining. The island is sinking slowly, a millimeter per year, while the reef grows upward at the same rate, maintaining perfect balance. 7-colored earth at Chamarel shows volcanic soils in distinct bands that don't mix even when stirred, a geological puzzle still unsolved. The Dead Sea drops 1.2 meters per year and has shrunk by 30% since 1960, creating thousands of sinkholes along its shores. These sinkholes appear without warning, swallowing roads, buildings, and date palm groves, the earth suddenly opening to reveal voids 20 meters deep. The water is 34% salt, so dense humans float without effort, impossible to dive below the surface without weights. The lake is dying because the Jordan River, its main source, is diverted for agriculture, input reduced to a trickle. Hotels built on the shore in the 1980s now stand a kilometer from water, stranded monuments to a retreating sea. The mineral-rich mud is said to have healing properties, and people cover themselves in black sludge, looking like living shadows. No life exists in the water except extremophile bacteria, the salinity too intense for even algae. The sinkholes form when freshwater underground dissolves salt layers, creating caverns that eventually collapse. Ain Gedi, an oasis on the western shore, still flows with fresh water, creating a ribbon of green in otherwise barren landscape. Some predictions say the Dead Sea could disappear entirely by 2050, leaving only salt flats where once Cleopatra bathed. Vancouver Island in Canada has the world's tallest Douglas fir trees, reaching 94 meters high. These giants, some over 1,000 years old, create cathedral groves where sunlight barely reaches the ground. The trees grow so tall because of perfect conditions, mild temperatures, abundant rainfall, and protection from extreme winds. First Nations peoples traditionally used single trees to carve ocean-going canoes, vessels that could hold 40 people from one trunk. The island's west coast receives 7 meters of rain annually, while the east, in rain shadow, gets less than 1 meter. This creates radically different ecosystems just 100 kilometers apart. Pacific storms hit the west coast with such force that trees grow sideways, shaped by wind into living sculptures. The trees communicate through mycorrhizal networks, sharing nutrients and warnings about insect attacks, a wood wide web older than the internet by millennia. When these giants fall, they become nurse logs, supporting hundreds of species for centuries as they slowly return to soil. Some stumps from logging a century ago are still alive, fed by neighboring trees through root connections, refusing to die even without leaves. Lake Nasser in Egypt extends 550 kilometers and required relocating 90,000 people when the Aswan Dam was built. This massive reservoir, one of the largest artificial lakes by surface area, drowned ancient Nubian villages that had existed for 5,000 years. The most famous rescue was Abu Simbel Temple, cut into blocks and reassembled on higher ground, an engineering feat almost as impressive as its original construction. The lake is so long it crosses into Sudan, where it's called Lake Nubia, the same water with different names. Crocodiles, absent from Egypt for decades, have returned via the lake, swimming north from southern populations. The lake's creation changed Egypt's climate, increasing humidity and creating morning mists unknown in ancient times. Silt that once fertilized the Nile Valley now settles in the lake, forcing farmers to use artificial fertilizers for the first time in history. The lake contains 132 cubic kilometers of water, a strategic reserve in the desert that Egypt guards carefully. Fish species from Lake Victoria were introduced and thrived, creating a fishing industry where only desert existed before. Islands in the lake are archaeological sites, ancient fortresses and temples now accessible only by boat. The Galapagos Islands are moving eastward at 7 centimeters per year, riding on the Nazca Plate toward South America. In 50 million years, these islands will crash into the continent, their unique species mixing with mainland populations if any survive that long. The islands are volcanic, born from a hot spot that stays stationary while the plate moves over it, creating a chain of islands of different ages. The oldest islands are sinking and eroding, while new ones are still being born, Fernandina erupting regularly. This geological conveyor belt means species must island hop to survive, driving evolution at visible speeds. Darwin's finches evolve measurably during droughts, beak sizes changing within generations to match available seeds. Marine iguanas, the only sea-going lizards, evolved here when land iguanas were stranded by rising seas. Giant tortoises on different islands have different shell shapes, adapted to their island's vegetation, evolution's experiments in reptilian form. The cold Humboldt Current brings penguins to the equator, while warm Panama Current brings tropical species, creating impossible combinations. Each island is a different age, different climate, different experiment in life, an archipelago that demonstrates evolution more clearly than any textbook. Lake Powell in the USA has 3,200 kilometers of shoreline, more than the entire west coast of the United States. This reservoir, created by flooding Glen Canyon, filled side canyons that create a fractal shoreline of endless inlets and bays. The lake contains 27 million acre-feet of water when full, though it hasn't been full since 1980 and may never fill again. Cathedral in the Desert, a natural amphitheater, was submerged for decades but emerges during drought, revealing waterfalls and hanging gardens preserved underwater. The bathtub ring on canyon walls shows historic high water, a white band 40 meters above current levels. Houseboats navigate channels barely wider than themselves, threading between canyon walls that rise 200 meters straight up. The lake's water is stratified by temperature, creating distinct layers that don't mix, each with different oxygen levels and clarity. Ancient petroglyphs disappear and reappear with water level changes, messages from the ancestral Puebloans alternately drowned and revealed. Side canyons contain ecosystems isolated since flooding, evolution accelerated by separation. The reservoir loses more water to evaporation and seepage than Los Angeles uses in a year, the desert reclaiming what was taken. Phillip Island in Australia hosts 32,000 little penguins that return to the same burrows each night after fishing. This nightly parade happens at sunset with clockwork precision, tiny penguins emerging from waves and waddling up the beach to their homes. Each penguin recognizes its burrow among thousands and its mate's call among the cacophony. The penguins spend the entire day at sea, swimming up to 100 kilometers to find food, then somehow navigate back to the exact same beach. They wait in the shallows until groups form, crossing the beach together for safety from predators. The colony has used this beach for thousands of years, penguin highways worn into the sand by millions of tiny feet. Tourism is carefully managed, with boardwalks preventing humans from interfering with penguin paths. The penguins are smallest of all penguin species, standing just 33 centimeters tall, looking like toys come to life. Climate change is shifting their food sources, forcing longer swims, and some penguins now return too exhausted to call to their mates. The ritual continues nightly, a prehistoric pattern older than human civilization. Tiny dinner-suited birds maintaining schedules more precise than trains. The Caspian Sea is shrinking by 7 centimeters annually and has dropped 1.5 meters since 1996. This inland sea, actually the world's largest lake, is dying from reduced river flow and increased evaporation. The Volga River provides 80% of incoming water, but dams and irrigation have reduced its flow significantly. As water retreats, it exposes seabed that becomes salt desert, expanding the Karakum and creating new wasteland. Caspian seals, found nowhere else, are losing pupping grounds on winter ice that forms less reliably each year. The sea contains 90% of the world's sturgeon, source of beluga caviar, but these prehistoric fish are nearly extinct from overfishing and habitat loss. 5 countries share the Caspian, but can't agree if it's a sea or lake, a legal distinction worth billions in oil rights. Ancient cities lie submerged from times when levels were lower, visible through clear water that's becoming saltier as the sea shrinks. The seabed contains mud volcanoes that occasionally erupt, creating temporary islands that disappear within months. Some scientists predict the Caspian could lose 25% of its area by 2100, creating a smaller, saltier sea surrounded by toxic salt flats. Mackinac Island in Michigan banned cars in 1898, and transportation is still by horse, bicycle, or foot only. This decision, originally to prevent carriages from being frightened, preserved a Victorian-era atmosphere that can't exist elsewhere. The island has 500 horses in summer, more than permanent human residents, creating a soundscape of hooves on pavement rather than engines. The smell of horses pervades everything, a sensory time travel that visitors either love or hate. Mail is delivered by horse-drawn wagon, as are groceries, furniture, and even construction materials. The island formed from ancient limestone reefs, the same formation as Niagara Falls, but here creating dramatic bluffs. Every building must be maintained in historical style, creating a town that looks frozen in 1890. In winter, when tourists leave, 500 residents remain, supplied by plane when the lake freezes too thin for snowmobiles, but too thick for boats. The Grand Hotel's porch, 200 meters long, is the world's longest, a Victorian extravagance that requires a team of painters working continuously. Fudge shops line the main street, 13 in total, making the island smell of chocolate when wind is right. Lake Balkhash in Kazakhstan is half fresh water and half salt water, divided by a narrow strait. This 600-kilometer-long lake performs a chemical magic trick that shouldn't be possible, maintaining different salinities in a single body of water. The eastern half is salty, the western fresh, separated by the Sariyesik Peninsula and the narrow Uzanaral Strait, which somehow prevents mixing. The lake is so shallow, averaging just 6 meters deep, that wind can push water from one end to the other, temporarily raising levels by meters. Rivers feed the western freshwater side, while the eastern side has no outlet, accumulating salt through evaporation. Fish populations differ between the two halves, freshwater species on one side, brackish species on the other, an aquarium divided by nature. The lake has shrunk by 2,000 square kilometers since 1970, victim of irrigation projects that divert its feeding rivers. In winter, the lake freezes completely despite the salt content, creating an ice road between north and south shores. Flamingos visit in summer, pink visitors to this chemical oddity in the steppe. Local legends speak of a dragon sleeping in the lake, its breath creating the strange division between fresh and salt. Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean hosts 40 million red crabs that migrate to the sea each November. This annual migration transforms the island into a moving red carpet, crabs covering every surface in their journey from forest to shore. Roads close, special bridges are erected, and the entire island adjusts its life to the crab's schedule. The crabs live in the forest year-round, but must return to the sea to breed, following routes used for millennia. Males arrive first, dig burrows, and wait for females, creating temporary cities in the sand. After mating, females carry eggs for 2 weeks, then release them into the ocean at high tide, timing coordinated by the moon. Baby crabs that survive return weeks later, millions of tiny red dots climbing from sea to forest. The island was uninhabited until 1888, allowing this migration to proceed undisturbed for millions of years. Yellow crazy ants, accidentally introduced, now kill millions of crabs annually, threatening this ancient spectacle. The crabs are so numerous they've shaped the island's ecology, their burrows aerating soil, their feeding controlling seedling growth. During migration, the sound of millions of crabs moving through leaf litter creates a constant rustling, like rain that never stops. The Sea of Galilee in Israel is actually a freshwater lake sitting 209 meters below sea level. This harp-shaped lake, small enough to see across, has influenced history disproportionate to its size. The lake fills a section of the Great Rift Valley, the massive crack that will eventually split Africa in two. Fed by the Jordan River, it serves as Israel's largest freshwater reservoir, though water levels have dropped dangerously in recent decades. Sudden storms arise without warning, katabatic winds rushing down surrounding hills creating 3-meter waves in minutes. These storms appear in ancient texts, geography becoming scripture. The lake stratifies in summer, warm water floating on cold, until autumn winds mix the layers in a turnover that brings nutrients to the surface. St. Peter's fish, tilapia unique to this lake, have evolved mouth-brooding behavior, carrying their young in their mouths for protection. Hot springs around the lake have been used for healing since Roman times, minerals from deep in the Earth's crust emerging at temperatures that suggest the rift is still active. The lake's level serves as a barometer for regional climate, dropping during droughts that affect millions, rising in wet years that come increasingly rarely. Heron Island on Australia's Great Barrier Reef is made entirely of coral and bird droppings accumulated over 6,000 years. This living island grows and shrinks with the reef's health, a barometer of ocean conditions built from skeleton and excrement. The island didn't exist when the pyramids were built, younger than human civilization, yet home to species millions of years old. Green and loggerhead turtles nest on beaches that their ancestors couldn't have known, evolution adapting to geography that changes within evolutionary time. The island is so small you can walk around it in 20 minutes, yet it hosts thousands of birds, their guano continuously adding to the island's mass. Pisonia trees grow from this enriched soil, their sticky seeds attaching to seabirds, sometimes fatally. creating a deadly partnership. The surrounding reef spawns simultaneously once a year, releasing billions of eggs and sperm in a synchronized explosion of life that turns water into soup. Sharks patrol the drop-off just meters from shore, the reef wall plunging from 1 meter to 70 meters, creating a vertical boundary between worlds. The island moves slightly with each cyclone, coral breaking and reforming, geography that rebuilds itself after every disaster. Lake Superior contains 10% of Earth's fresh surface water and creates snowfall 300 kilometers away through lake effect. This lake is so vast, it behaves like an ocean, with its own weather systems, shipping forecasts, and maritime traditions. The lake never gives up its dead, a saying that reflects water too cold for decomposition, bodies sinking and staying down in 4-degree water. Ships lost a century ago sit perfectly preserved on the bottom, paint still visible, cargo still in holds. The lake creates snow by evaporating into cold air masses, moisture rising then falling as snow that can bury cities. Duluth, Minnesota once received 2 meters of snow in a single storm, all moisture from Superior. The lake contains enough water to flood North and South America 30 centimeters deep. Islands in the lake have their own lakes, which have their own islands, a fractal geography of water within land within water. Ice volcanoes form along winter shores, cones of ice that erupt with spray, looking like geology made of frozen water. The lake is so young geologically that it's still rebounding from the weight of glaciers, rising 30 centimeters per century. Svalbard's seed vault in Norway stores 1.1 million seed varieties at minus 18 degrees Celsius inside permafrost that acts as natural refrigeration. This agricultural backup for humanity sits 130 meters above sea level, high enough to remain dry even if all ice caps melt. The vault extends 146 meters into the mountain through permafrost that has been frozen for millennia. Even if power fails, the temperature would take centuries to rise above freezing, a failsafe using Earth's natural refrigeration. Seeds from every country are stored here, including North Korea and South Korea, whose seeds sit peacefully side by side. The vault has already been used, Syrian seeds withdrawn to replace those lost to war, proving its purpose isn't hypothetical. No single person has access. Opening requires multiple keys from different organizations, security through distribution of power. The entrance portal glows with LED artwork that changes color with the Arctic light, a beacon in polar darkness. Polar bears occasionally investigate the entrance, adding an unexpected security layer. The seeds could remain viable for thousands of years, wheat for 1,700 years, sorghum for 20,000, a time capsule of agriculture that could outlast civilization. Lake Chad has shrunk by 95% since 1960, from 25,000 square kilometers to just 1,350 square kilometers today. This catastrophic shrinkage has turned fishing villages into desert towns, boats stranded dozens of kilometers from water. The lake is so shallow, averaging just 1.5 meters, that small changes in rainfall create huge changes in area. 4 countries share the lake, but there's increasingly little to share, conflicts arising over water that becomes more precious as it disappears. Millions depend on the lake for fishing, farming, and livestock, a population that grows as the resource shrinks. The lake bed exposed by shrinking has become farmland, incredibly fertile from centuries of sediment, but vulnerable to the lake's return if rains increase. Islands appear and disappear with water level changes, political boundaries becoming fluid as geography shifts. Hippopotamuses that once thrived here are locally extinct, victims of habitat loss and hunting. Ancient rock art shows the lake surrounded by elephants and giraffes, evidence of a greener Sahara when the lake was an inland sea. Some propose refilling it by diverting rivers from the Congo Basin, engineering on a continental scale to reverse human-caused disaster. Mont Saint-Michel in France becomes an island 238 days per year when tides surround the mount with water. This granite island, topped by a medieval abbey, exists in the margin between land and sea, its identity changing twice daily. Tides here are among Europe's highest, varying up to 14 meters. Water racing in at speeds faster than horses can gallop. Medieval pilgrims had to time their crossings carefully or drown, the bay's quicksand and rapid tides claiming many who miscalculated. The mount was fortified precisely because tides provided natural defense. Sieges impossible when attackers had to wait for low tide. The bay is silting up, the mount becoming more often peninsula than island, despite efforts to maintain its maritime character. At low tide, the bay becomes 250 square kilometers of sand, rivers carving temporary channels that change with every tide. The abbey seems to float during high tides, its reflection creating a double monument, one pointing to heaven, one to depths. Sheep graze on salt marshes around the mount, their meat flavored by the salt-tolerant plants they eat. The spiral of the village wrapping around the rock follows ancient pilgrim paths, architecture shaped by geology and faith. Lake Nicaragua contains freshwater sharks that adapted after the lake was cut off from the ocean. These bull sharks, trapped when tectonic activity isolated the lake, evolved to survive in fresh water, though recent studies suggest they migrate via the San Juan River. The lake is so large it was thought to be a sea by early explorers, waves and horizons suggesting ocean despite the fresh water. Ometepe Island in the lake consists of two volcanoes joined by an isthmus, creating an island that looks like an hourglass from above. One volcano is active, regularly puffing smoke, while the other is dormant, covered in cloud forest where howler monkeys announce dawn. The lake contains countless islands, including an archipelago built by pre-Columbian peoples who created artificial islands from rocks and earth. Granada's colonial buildings reflect in water that once connected Atlantic and Pacific, a potential canal route before Panama was chosen. The lake's size moderates Nicaragua's climate, creating rain on one side while the other stays dry. Freshwater sawfish once lived here too, but fishing and pollution drove them extinct, leaving only the sharks as reminders of the lake's oceanic past. Wind patterns create three distinct zones in the lake, each with different fish species. Islay in Scotland has more distilleries per square kilometer than anywhere else, with 9 distilleries on one 620 square kilometer island. The island's whiskey tastes of its geography: peat smoke, sea salt, and something medicinal from iodine and seaweed. Water for whiskey flows through peat bogs millions of years old, picking up flavors from compressed plant matter older than human history. Each distillery uses water from different sources, creating distinct flavors despite being kilometers apart. The peat used for malting was formed when Islay had a tropical climate, compressed palm fronds and tree ferns now flavoring alcohol. Atlantic storms drive waves over distillery walls, salt spray adding to the angel's share evaporating from barrels. The island has more whiskey aging than it has people, millions of liters sleeping in warehouses, some barrels older than anyone alive. Barnacle geese from Greenland winter here, their calls mixing with the sound of stills, nature and culture fermenting together. The Gulf Stream moderates temperatures so palm trees grow at the same latitude as Moscow, creating microclimates where distilleries age whiskey differently depending on their position relative to the sea. The Salton Sea in California was created by accident in 1905 when irrigation canals overflowed for 18 months. Engineers trying to irrigate the Imperial Valley accidentally diverted the entire Colorado River, creating California's largest lake where desert existed. The sea has no outlet, becoming saltier each year as water evaporates and salt accumulates, now 50% saltier than the Pacific Ocean. Fish introduced in the 1950s created a sport fishing paradise that lasted decades before salinity killed them in massive die-offs. Millions of dead tilapia periodically cover beaches, their decay creating a smell detectable 10 kilometers away. Despite this, the sea is crucial for migrating birds, 400 species using it as a stop on the Pacific Flyway. As the sea shrinks, it exposes lakebed contaminated with agricultural runoff, creating toxic dust storms that reach Los Angeles. Abandoned resorts from the sea's heyday, as California's Riviera, crumble into water that's too toxic to touch. Geothermal plants harvest energy from hot springs that would have created the sea naturally if humans hadn't done it accidentally. The sea is dying, losing 1% of its volume annually, but plans to save it cost billions nobody wants to spend. Fraser Island in Australia is the world's largest sand island at 1,840 square kilometers, with rainforest growing on sand. This shouldn't be possible. Rainforests need nutrients that sand doesn't provide, yet here, forests thrive on pure silica. The secret is fungi that release nutrients from sand grains, creating soil from sterile substrate over millennia. Freshwater lakes perch impossibly above sea level, held by impermeable layers of coffee rock, organic matter compressed into waterproof sheets. Lake Mackenzie's water is so pure, it's essentially distilled, too clean to support most life, creating swimming conditions like floating in liquid crystal. Dingoes here are Australia's purest, isolated from domestic dogs, maintaining genetics from when they arrived 4,000 years ago. The island moves, sand migrating north with longshore drift, the entire island traveling slowly up the coast. Colored sand cliffs called the cathedrals show 700,000 years of sand deposition, layers of different minerals creating natural art. Huge sand blows move inland, mobile deserts within rainforest, burying trees that emerge decades later when sand moves on. Ships wrecked on the eastern beach, including the Maheno in 1935, slowly disappear into sand, becoming reefs of rust. Lake Urmia in Iran has turned red due to algae and bacteria as it shrinks, losing 80% of its size since 1970. Once the Middle East's largest lake, it's now a crimson reminder of water mismanagement and climate change. The red color comes from Dunaliella algae and halophilic bacteria thriving in water now 8 times saltier than the ocean. Flamingos that once fed here have fled, their pink sustained by the same organisms that now color the entire lake. Islands that hosted ancient Armenian churches are now peninsulas, pilgrims walking where boats once sailed. The lake's shrinking has created salt storms, winds lifting dried salt from exposed beds, creating white hurricanes that poison agricultural land hundreds of kilometers away. Traditional Lake Urmia therapy, where people covered themselves in therapeutic mud, is now impossible, the mud too toxic from concentrated minerals. Satellite images show the color change from space, blue to green to red as the lake dies, a planetary fever visible from orbit. Bridges built to cross the lake now span mostly dry land, monuments to water that no longer exists. Recovery efforts include releasing water from dams, but decades of damage may be irreversible. Skellig Michael off Ireland was inhabited by monks from the 6th century who built beehive huts on 230-meter-high cliffs. These stone huts, built without mortar, have survived 1,400 years of Atlantic storms through perfect engineering. Monks climbed 600 stone steps, carved from solid rock daily, a vertical pilgrimage repeated for centuries. The monastery exists at the edge of possibility, clinging to rock 12 kilometers from mainland, surrounded by seas that rage 200 days annually. Puffins now nest where monks once prayed, 4,000 pairs returning each summer to burrows between ancient stones. The monks sustain themselves on fish, seabirds, and vegetables grown in tiny gardens built from seaweed and guano. They abandoned the island in the 12th century when climate cooled, making survival impossible. Storm petrels nest in the monastery walls, their eerie calls at night perhaps explaining why Vikings called it Skellig of the Phantoms. Recent fame from Star Wars filming threatens the delicate ecosystem, human footsteps eroding in years what storms couldn't destroy in centuries. The lesser Skellig, visible from Michael, hosts 70,000 gannets, the second largest colony in the world, a white mountain of birds. Mono Lake in California is 760,000 years old and 3 times saltier than the ocean with unique limestone towers. These tufa towers formed underwater when calcium-rich springs met carbonate-rich lake water, chemistry creating architecture. As the lake level dropped from water diversions to Los Angeles, towers emerged like alien cities, limestone castles never meant to see air. The lake has no fish, but trillions of brine shrimp and alkali flies thrive, feeding millions of migrating birds. The flies create such dense clouds that early travelers wore goggles, and Native Americans harvested their pupae as food. 2 islands in the lake host 85% of California's breeding gull population, protected by water too alkaline for most predators. The lake turns pink in late summer when algae bloom, a color intensified by its mirror-like surface. Underwater springs create areas of different salinity, chemical boundaries invisible from surface but crucial for organisms. Despite appearing dead, the lake is incredibly productive, creating more biomass per square meter than rainforest. Mark Twain called it the Dead Sea of California, but it's actually explosively alive, just with life forms that shouldn't exist. Vanuatu's Tanna Island has Mount Yasur volcano that erupts every 3 to 4 minutes and has done so for 800 years. This is the world's most accessible active volcano. Visitors can walk to the crater rim and peer into Earth's throat. The eruptions are strombolian, throwing lava bombs hundreds of meters into air with sounds like thunder. Local tribes consider Yasur sacred, believing their ancestors' spirits live in the crater. The constant eruptions create their own weather system, ash clouds that bring rain to one side while the other stays dry. At night, the crater glows red, a navigation beacon visible 100 kilometers at sea. Captain Cook called it the lighthouse of the Pacific. The volcanic ash makes soil incredibly fertile, gardens growing at the volcano's base despite regular ash falls. Villages have evacuation songs, traditional melodies that coordinate escape when eruptions grow dangerous. The volcano has created its own ecosystem, with plants that grow only in warm volcanic soil, evolution adapting to constant catastrophe. Tourists throw offerings into the crater, coins and flowers vaporizing instantly, modern sacrifices to ancient forces. Isabella Island in the Galapagos was formed by 6 volcanoes merging and is still growing from ongoing eruptions. This seahorse-shaped island is younger than human civilization, formed just 1 million years ago, a teenager in geological time. 5 of the 6 volcanoes remain active, erupting regularly, adding new land to an island still being born. Giant tortoises on different volcanoes have evolved distinct shell shapes, despite living on the same island, separated by lava flows that create impassable barriers. The volcanoes create rain shadows so extreme that one side receives 3 meters of rain, while the other is desert. Penguins live on the equator here, the only tropical penguins, made possible by the cold Cromwell Current, Marine iguanas grow larger here than anywhere else. Dragons that swim in the sea and bask on lava still warm from creation. Flightless cormorants evolved here, losing flight in an island paradise with no predators, wings becoming flippers. The western volcanoes are among Earth's most active, erupting so frequently that maps become outdated within years. Volcanic tunnels run for kilometers underground. Lava tubes that once carried molten rock now home to unique blind species. Ball's Pyramid near Lord Howe Island rises 562 meters straight from the ocean, the world's tallest sea stack formed 7 million years ago. This blade of rock, only 300 meters wide at its base, seems impossible, too tall and narrow to stand against Pacific storms. It's the remnant of a massive shield volcano. Everything else eroded away, leaving just this spine. The pyramid was thought lifeless until 2001, when scientists found the world's rarest insect, the Lord Howe Island stick insect, living under a single shrub 100 meters up the cliff. Only 24 individuals existed, the entire species clinging to existence on a few square meters of vertical rock. The successful captive breeding program from those 24 insects proves life's determination to persist in impossible places. Climbing the pyramid requires technical expertise, the rock often wet from spray, crumbling volcanic stone that can't be trusted. Seabirds nest on tiny ledges, their guano the only soil, supporting the few plants that grow here. Waves have carved caves at the base, slowly undermining the stack that will eventually collapse, probably within thousands of years. From Lord Howe Island, it looks like a monument to something forgotten, Earth's last gesture from a vanished volcano, pointing at stars it will never reach.